Hey everyone, it's Reed. I'm hoping that if you like what you hear here, you'll like what you read over at the print edition of the Homefront on Substack. 2 or 3 times a week, I share my thoughts about what's going on in the news, how I'm seeing things politically, and where I think we need to go as a country. I hope you'll check it out. And now, on with the show. Welcome to the Homefront. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm joined by disinformation expert Nina Jankowicz, co-founder and CEO of the American Sunlight Project, a bipartisan group increasing the cost of lies that undermine democracy. Full disclosure, I am an advisory board member. She has advised governments, international organizations, and tech companies, testified on the highest global stages, and led accessible, actionable research about the effects of disinformation on women, minorities, democratic activists, and freedom of expression around the world. In 2022, she was appointed to lead the DHS Disinformation Governance Board, a position she resigned from shortly after its creation after a sustained disinformation campaign caused the Biden administration to abandon the project. We'll talk about that in just a second. She is the author of 2 books, How to Lose the Disinformation War and How to Be a Woman Online, both of which are available wherever fine books are sold. Today, she's coming to us from the greater Washington, D.C. area. Nina, welcome.
Thank you so much, Reed. Great to be with you.
You know, this is fascinating is not the right word, dynamic time in your life. Maybe the last couple of years have been, but obviously you have a significant background in disinformation. And I think, I just finished the book Nexus by Yuval Noah Harari, which is excellent, very readable for, sort of a work of history, philosophy, AI, all that. But we forget that the information flows really are the underpinning of everything else. And I've been thinking about the context of how we've seen, Donald Trump and his entire sort of movement do this, which is like, to use like an old radar expression, right? Like they throw jamming into the air, right? They jam all this stuff. So if you're an otherwise normal person looking at your own personal radar screen, there's all this fuzz and stuff. It's really hard to figure out like what's there and what's not. And far too often it doesn't clear up at all. And you're just sort of left with this either false or incomplete picture.
Yeah, well, one of the books that really influenced my early thinking on this when I was still just focused on Russia back in the day, would that it were only just Russia now,
Right.
was Peter Pomerantsev's Nothing is True and Everything is Possible, which is what somebody who worked in Russian TV, Russian propaganda outlets said to him.
Right.
Was kind of the goal of Russian disinformation back then. And I think certainly that is the environment that we're operating in today, where nobody can agree on our shared reality. It's all based on vibes and facts aren't findable. And that's really scary to me. And I was going to say before, it's a weird time to be me in particular. Right. As somebody who's been the national, if not global face, unfairly accused of censorship for a role that I took in my area of expertise in government. I just found out this week I was put on Kash Patel's list of deep state government enemies.
Yeah, I saw that. I want to ask you about that. Look, I assume that many of us in this struggle are on a list somewhere, but your name actually appears in public on these things.
Yeah.
If I might just, digress for a moment, how are you, and how do you contend with that on a daily basis, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I mean, the flippant answer is that I'm kind of broken because when you deal with a national harassment campaign, the scope of emotions that you process it just narrows a lot, both good and bad. Like something good can happen to me and I celebrate for a millisecond and then I'm back to like, all right, let's get to work. And the same is true for when bad things happen. I mean, on a more practical level, I'm very lucky to have an extremely supportive spouse and family, a really good therapist, and a great team behind me and friends like you who I know have my back. That doesn't make it easy, but I think, I'm equipped with the tools I need to survive day to day in terms of IT and operational security. And I think I've dealt with almost everything the spectrum of harms has to offer me, save, thank goodness, any physical altercation yet. Am I worried that that's going to happen as Trump's supporters are emboldened going forward over the next few years? Yeah. Am I worried about a potential weaponized government seeking retribution against enemies, real and perceived. I'm worried about that too. But I also feel like again, to quote, another great scholar in this space, Timothy Snyder, who's been everywhere recently for good reason, I'm not going to obey in advance either. I think continuing to hold my ground is an important indication, not just to Americans, but in particular to women who I've championed for a long time, that when the bad guys come to call, we got to stick it out. And if I continue to do so, I hope that, it'll be easier for them down the road.
Well, and thank you for that. So let me go back actually a couple of years then,
Sure.
based on what you said. So you get appointed to the Disinformation Board, Advisory Board, in 2022. It gets a lot of backlash, and immediately the Biden administration just wraps it up.
Yeah.
Like, to your point, like, if you're the Department of Homeland Security, right? I mean, I worked there many moons ago as part of FEMA.
My condolences.
Yeah, I know. Right there at the beginning, right as it stood up, March 1st, 2003. God, it's hard to believe it's been that long. But, if you're the Department of Homeland Security, as, a law enforcement agency in the United States government, like, why do that? Like, nobody can tell you what to do. So why back off so quickly?
Yeah, that's an answer I still don't know. Personally, the story went like this. I was contacted in late 2021, asked if I would consider a role at DHS, and my answer, of course, is yeah, I'm happy to serve my country in my area of expertise. I go through the security clearance process, which kind of got fast tracked, and I was shocked it went so quickly because I've been a lot of places and have a lot of contacts all over the world. And, my start date was March 2nd, 2022, so 19 years after you first stepped foot in the building. And, I said to my supervisors who, again, there was a lot of political will for me to be in that building, a lot of political will to do this coordinating mission of bringing disparate parts of DHS, FEMA, Customs and Border Protection, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, all of which are touching disinformation in some way, needing to respond to it. It affects their issue areas. Bring them together and make sure they're gelled, harmonize those efforts. It was a policy job. It had nothing to do with actual operational authority or responding. It was literally herding government cats. But I said to my supervisor, still, I've seen this go wrong in other countries. I write about it in my book, in fact, how it went wrong in the Czech Republic. We need to be as transparent as possible about this. Let's make sure that we, do briefings, get a fact sheet out, inform the requisite members of Congress who hold the purse strings, all the good stuff. And somewhere along the line, for some reason, somebody decided, we can just let the secretary announce this at a hearing he's doing and we'll put a blurb in Politico. The blurb didn't really accurately reflect what it was we were going to be doing. The secretary kind of bungled the announcement in Congress. And within 6 hours of the announcement going live, far-right influencers like Jack Posobiec were tweeting that this was going to be a ministry of truth and I was going to be America's chief censor. And then by the next day, we had Tucker Carlson saying that I was going to send men with guns to the homes of Americans with whom I disagreed. If that were the truth, that would be f***ing scary. Pardon my French. I wouldn't have taken a job like that. And, I'm a person who studied authoritarianism. I know how this stuff works. My grandfather was in a gulag. Come on.
Right.
And it just went completely out of control. And the government was like deer in headlights. I was put under embargo. I was told I couldn't tweet or talk to the media. Nobody was getting anything out from DHS. It took us like 4 days to issue a fact sheet. In the meantime, they weren't prepping the White House with, flags or questions about things that could come up adequately, in my opinion. They sent the secretary to do Sunday shows, which, sorry, when you have people sending death threats to one of your political appointees, the Sunday shows aren't the folks that you need to reach.
Right.
And it just kept spinning out of control. And I was told, just wait, it'll blow over. It'll blow over. Meanwhile, I went to a meeting at the NSC to talk to some colleagues it was a standing meeting for a long time. And I had the very surreal experience of sitting there and seeing my face on Fox News while I was sitting at the table in the old executive office building, being told it was going to blow over. Right. I was pregnant at the time too, Reed. So
Yeah,
I
of
was
course.
just a couple weeks away from becoming a mom. And My face was on Fox News every hour on the hour, and I was getting credible death threats. We were doxxed. A friend from the IC who had helped us as kind of a private security consultant told us that we should probably leave our house.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I ended up resigning, not because of the threats, but because the administration just completely rolled over and it was clear that they weren't going to get the work done. And to me, that just belies the lack of understanding. And I've written about this publicly. Like, it's the lack of understanding that disinformation is one of the key issues that underlies all of the problems that our country is facing right now.
Let's talk about that, because the way that you laid that out actually is a really good case study in how this stuff works, which is the bad guys are really good at this.
Yes.
They're really good at taking one thing and moving so fast and so far. Was it Mark Twain who said, a lie goes around the world before the truth gets out of bed? Like, they might as well etch that over their door sills, right? Like, that is how they operate. And, that's the thing, is everyone, with the white hats always seems to be like, can you really believe this happened? Look, how many years into this do we have to be?
Yeah.
Almost 10 years into the Trump era. Like, people still don't understand. People still don't figure it out. And so here it is. And that was one thing too, is I've been listening to some of the postmortems on the Harris campaign. They were so well coordinated politically. They were all saying the same thing. Like, but that's the feature of the whole movement.
That's how it's always been. Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, it was probably a couple hours max from the first tweets expressing shock about the board to Posobiec to the mouths of members of Congress. And then we were on Fox News within hours from there. And it was every hour on the hour, coordinated messaging across the whole ecosystem. That was just repeated over and over, which, by the way, also makes it a lot more difficult to bring any defamation cases to court, because it's like, who got it from whom and who says what? I mean, Fox played an outsized role, obviously. But it's just, it is a snowball effect. And if you don't respond quickly and respond in the right medium, in the right way, telling a compelling story and not just a mealy-mouthed, boring government fact sheet, you've lost the battle already. Governments around the world struggle with this, but I think we're uniquely bad at it because of our size, and because at least among Democratic administrations and some Republican administrations, although it's been a while since we've had a normal Republican administration, not in the digital era, right? There's this idea of clearance processes that need to happen before words can go out. And that's just not the way the digital ecosystem works. And the Russians understand that too. Less coordination on their side, a lot more flinging spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. But once they find what sticks, they drive that message home over and over and over again. And they have volume on their side.
Volume both in the amount and volume in the level of noise, right? Like in two different ways, which is they're very loud all the time.
Yes.
And to your point, like, I feel like maybe the Russians are a better example of this, but I feel like in the disinfo space, there are always pots and pots of spaghetti going, with people doing nothing but throwing it out, because it's cheap to make. You can make a lot of it very quickly. You don't have to be very sophisticated to do it. And you just throw it out and out and out. And if something hits, right, that's the one that goes, boom, let's go. And to your point, like, what kind of clearance process does the Trump administration have when the former and soon to be president literally makes policy over Twitter, right? Like, there is no clearance policy, right?
Yeah, while he's sitting on the toilet. Exactly. Firing and hiring on Twitter and beyond. Absolutely. And I think, I'm not saying that we need to completely take the bumpers off the bowling alley, but I think we need to wake up to the realities of 21st century online communication. And some governments have done that, right? Look at Estonia. Look at the way Ukraine has responded in the face of Russian aggression. And the difference, actually, between the Poroshenko administration, which preceded Zelensky, and the Zelensky administration, which understood communications being a bunch of entertainment people. A lot of, Instagram lives, they used Telegram. The way that man used Telegram during the 2019 campaign, it was like I had a celebrity in my phone talking to me all the time. It was incredible. They got that. And that, I'm not saying it's been perfect, but the resiliency and the accessibility of those communications played a large part in Ukraine's resistance over the past almost 3 years.
Well, and I mean, even still, right? They produce videos with their like little hunter killer drones, like dropping a bomb into the hatch of a Russian tank with all this gigantic music behind it, right? Like they very much understand, to your point, the medium in which they're playing, which is it's not a video game. This is like a real drone dropping a real bomb on a real tank, but they understand like it's an attention economy. Right. And it has an outsized effect on the morale of both the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian people and the West. And it makes the Russians nuts because they have to watch another $85 million tank, right, that they can't replace, blown to smithereens by an $18 drone driven by a $125 Chromebook.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to their credit, too, a lot of people think that they would maybe call it fighting fire with fire, but I don't think it is, because for the large majority of Ukrainian communications, like, it's propaganda perhaps, but it's not disinformation. There's not a lot of lies in there. There may be a couple of times the truth was fudged, but we're not talking about the sort of stuff that Russia does where they literally hire actors to say things happened that didn't happen, or put cadavers in cars that they then blow up and claimed were car bombed, right? That's not the level of stuff that we're talking about. And I think what they do is really smart and for the most part, incredibly truthful. And if a country like Ukraine can do it, which has fewer resources than the United States, why can't we?
Well, a couple of things there is I want to speak to one about the fighting fire with fire, which is how do you maintain a level of willingness to say, I will stay on the side of truth, when you could, fighting fire would be, we'll fire misinformation and disinformation back their way, right? Now, I've always said to Democrats who are like, oh, well, they fight dirty. I'm like, yes, they lie about everything, but that's not fighting dirty. And the crazy things they say out loud. Right? Like that you don't have to make anything up, but is it hard to maintain that, sense of like, I don't, just because they jumped off the bridge doesn't mean I have to, that just because, they've become amoral doesn't mean I have to. I mean, does it ever get tempting to say, I'll use the tools of my opponent against them because they're so effective?
I have never felt that temptation, and I don't know if it is because I have seen it blow up in so many people's faces, or if there's something, glowing and optimistic inside of me. But anytime we screw up, even if it's not deliberate, like take the Black Lives Matter protests and the ways that police were beating up journalists. There's so much footage, right, of a CNN cameraman getting thrown to the ground or whatever. What did Russia do with that? Immediately turned it into whataboutis propaganda. So even when we're doing our best and misstepping sometimes, that can be used against us. Imagine, if we did try to do this, and there actually are examples of this, in I can't remember if it's the Philippines or Indonesia during COVID, DOD did some psyops where they attempted to dissuade people from taking Sinovac as a FU to the Chinese. It's pretty immoral. They got found out about it, and now everyone's like, well, the U.S. government does disinformation too, so why are you being so holier than thou about it? There was a similar thing that we did in Cuba where it was poorly managed, and of course it got found out. Like, I just think it's not worth the risk. That's the first thing that I think of. And the potential risk of it being used against us that's so much more potent and powerful than just the truth well told, which is a phrase that I got from a guy named Alex Aiken, who used to run comms for the British government, a conservative kind of special advisor, and again ran comms for Number 10. The truth well told. I mean, we just got to get better at telling these stories. And I think, to their credit, the Harris campaign did do a good job with that. They just somehow didn't inspire those extra 5 million folks to turn out the way they ought to have.
It's only 5 million people. Well, but I mean, that's the thing is, I mean, let me just sidestep into politics for a second, right? These things all happen on the margins, and campaigns matter on the margins. Good campaigns, cover them. Bad campaigns don't. So let's talk about the American Sunlight Project. So tell me about how it came to be, what it's trying to do, and what it is you're currently working on.
Yeah, so around this time last year, I kind of put my head up above the parapet. In 2023, I had been deposed by the subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government, led by Jim Jordan. Spent 5 hours with him. Do not recommend.
Ugh, God, I can't imagine.
I took a cyber stalker to court and got a protective order, which he then tried to appeal twice. Nothing says I'm not stalking you, like I'm appealing the protective order you won against me. Um, and I was in the process of filing my lawsuit against Fox News. And for the first time since I left DHS, I finally felt like I had some spare capacity to kind of breathe. It probably also helped that my kid was no longer an infant, and we were sort of getting back to normalcy with that as well. And looked around and I saw my colleagues in the disinformation research space and other folks who were working in trust and safety at platforms, who were working on these issues at government, coming under fire in a similar way to what I had experienced. And some of those institutions were folding. In the past year, we've seen, the Stanford Internet Observatory kind of shift gears, no longer working on disinformation. I had been hearing from colleagues in academia that there was pressure on them not to pursue grants in this area, or they were made to defend their research in ways that they hadn't before. And that was really disturbing to me. And it was clear to me that the effort to make counter disinformation work political had succeeded. And I liked to joke back then that this whole experience had radicalized me. I think I'm like a little bit left of center. I think that's how I'd describe my politics broadly. Progressive on some social issues, but foreign policy wise in particular, pretty centrist, right?
Yeah.
But this whole issue radicalized me, and I was willing to go into the political fray because I had experienced the worst of what our political system had to offer. And so I started the American Sunlight Project because I felt like somebody needed to carry the banner forward in this area that had become so embattled. And I've experienced the worst of all of this already. And so it felt like I was in a unique position to do this. And so we we kind of wanted to start by offering that protection to disinformation researchers. So we did a big research piece exposing how the allegations of censorship that have been lobbied against so many of us, how that has been laundered from fringe bloggers to members of Congress to folks like Elon Musk to entities like America First Legal, which have become the hatchet of Republicans like Jim Jordan, in launching frivolous lawsuits against people like me. We did a report like that. We've been doing other disinformation research. We uncovered a bot network, a likely Russian bot network that's been active in some cases for 15 years on Twitter, right before the election. And we also do education work, and that's primarily focused on getting ourselves out there in the media for the first couple months of our existence, but that's going to shift in 2025. And I wish we could have done it sooner. We're a little strapped for cash, more than I'd like us to be. But I'm hoping that we can do a lot more stuff in local communities. This is the stuff that my research has always pointed to as one of the key antidotes to disinformation, getting people together to talk to one another. This is a human problem, right? So that's the plans for 2025. But, the week this podcast is coming out, we also have a report that is being released looking at deepfake pornography targeting members of Congress. A lot of people don't think of deepfake porn as a part of disinformation, but it is. It's gender-based disinformation primarily that is trying to keep women out of politics and public life. And we found that about 1 in 6 female members of Congress are targeted with deepfake pornography.
And this is across the aisle, both Republicans and Democrats?
Yeah. Oh, and that's the fascinating thing. Party affiliation has no effect on the likelihood of you being targeted. We did find one male member who has deepfake porn of him. We're not disclosing the names. That's up to them to do, and we don't want to drive traffic to this stuff, obviously. But this is a bipartisan issue. It's not only affecting prominent men and women, it's affecting schoolgirls as young as 12. We've had a number of incidents this year across the United States and the world where girls are targeted by their classmates because the stuff is getting so much more accessible. And I've been targeted by it too. In all of the garbage that I had to deal with, I also found that I had been targeted with deepfake porn. Me and Hillary Clinton appear in a video together, which is an odd thing to find out via Google alert.
Oh God, I'm so sorry. Well, let me ask. I mean, so yeah, we'll make sure to we'll link to not only the ASP but also the various things in the show notes. But let me just hit the pause button for a second and drill down a little bit on the idea of being a woman, online in the 21st century. Any woman, from 12-year-old girls, teenage girls, I know have a horrific time on social media. But talk a little bit about like what it is that you and your colleagues have to face. I mean, if somebody says something terrible to me, right? Like I'm lucky enough, I can just brush it off, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay. But it seems that, and I have other friends and colleagues, who are also, in the movement, in the effort, for whom, yeah, I mean, the abuse is constant. And it only seems to ratchet up. It never seems that, like, once they've crossed some threshold that no one ever thought they would, it just goes from there. They only hit the accelerator.
Yeah. Well, I know Carolyn Gleitch has been a podcast
Sure.
attendee
Here
of
in Utah,
yours.
yeah.
Yeah, she's wonderful. She's also experienced a lot of this. So I think, in our experiences, and I'm not going to speak for her, but, I've interviewed a lot of these women. I've spoken with her as well. It's not just, you're ugly or you're a C word or whatever. That's easy enough to deal with, but it's fairly specific. It's violent threats, it's doxing, it is swatting. I've had, in particular, women of color tell me that their children are mentioned very frequently. Things like, "Oh, I hope your son doesn't come across a police officer today," things like that. Your families are invoked. I've had that experience as well with my cyber stalker where, um, before I gave birth, he said, "Oh, she'll probably just have a post-birth abortion," this speaking about this kid that I wanted and carried to term,
Right.
but also, after he was born, alleging that he didn't exist because I hadn't posted pictures of him on the internet. I wonder why I didn't do that.
Right.
And then saying that he wanted to see proof, which is one of the things that actually, spurred me to go get that protective order because this is a guy who has a history of showing up outside people's houses, filming them, and I just the idea of we knew we had been doxxed already. The idea of this man showing up outside my house, while I was gonna take my kid to daycare or bringing him home, and filming that and live streaming it for everyone to see was something that was really terrifying. And so it's not just mean words on the internet. I think that a lot of people who are like, "Oh, grow thicker skin if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen." I invite them to come to my kitchen and put on my high heels because it is not what men
And put
experience. It
out your grease
isn't.
fire. No, it's absolutely not. It's not even close. Um, so let me ask you with your cyber stalker, you mentioned Jack Posobiec, and I think, remind me, but he was one of the first guys to go through like the Comet ping pong thing, right? With
He was the
QAnon,
Pizzagate guy.
the
He was
Pizzagate
the
guy,
guy.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, who was convinced that, at Comet Ping Pong in Washington, D.C., Hillary Clinton and the Democrats were torturing children in the basement of this like pizza parlor, which then a man, I think from North Carolina, actually went to this place with an AR-15, shot, one, round into the air because he couldn't find the basement because, like the Alamo,
It
it doesn't
doesn't
have one.
exist.
Right. So, that guy, right? Posobiec pushes all this stuff. This guy, thank God, nothing worse happened. But are these guys, and I assume they're mostly guys being radicalized, is the disinformation the main funnel? Is that the main pipeline into these guys? Is that they're just, I mean, are they predisposed to it? I'm curious about sort of the downstream recipient. Is this what happens to them?
I mean, I wouldn't say the majority of people are radicalized to violence. I think a lot of people find comfort in abusing people from behind their screens.
Right. Keyboard cowboys. Right.
But there are people who will show up, right? And one of the most infuriating things to me as I was, talk about surreal. The day that my doula came for like my final birth education class before I was due to give birth, Federal Protective Services also came to my house to check my locks and my windows and were sitting down with me. And they basically told me these guys are all bark, no bite. And I'm like, hold on, aren't you guys part of the outfit that missed January 6th? Like,
Right.
I don't trust you.
And if you feel like that, why are you here?
Yeah, well, and also like that's not something you say to somebody who's undergoing a massive national harassment campaign and who is pregnant. But also, like, then later on, if you remember that in the summer of 2022, there was a guy who went to the Ohio field office of the FBI and shot it up and then was killed in a shootout in a cornfield. That guy had tweeted about the Disinformation Governance Board, right? So there's a small percentage of these people who own guns and are not afraid to use them. And I can't speak to what's going on in their home lives. I suspect they're not very good. And I'm not going to be flippant about that, right? I'm not making fun of that. I think there are real grievances that are being, like with Russia, exploited by people who are imitating that playbook, who understand that they're mad people. If they can marshal that to support their cause, it's a good thing for them, and there might be some casualties along the way. That's the attitude that I really can't abide, that people like Posobiec, people like Jim Jordan, who I will say one of the most gratifying things about being deposed by him was that I got to tell him and his colleagues to their faces about the effect that they had had on my life. It's part of the congressional record, and I got that record released with my colleagues from ASP. So I'm really proud of that, and I encourage everybody to go read it because I think they need to be reminded of the human cost of those lies. And I will also say something I'm constantly surprised by is if I get an old guy, invariably it's an old guy, on Facebook messaging me some filth about how I'm a traitor to the United States, he's usually got, profile picture with his grandkids, and I can look at his Facebook picture and profile and find out some stuff about him. I say, hey Joe, thanks for your message. I see you've got a grandson. He's about the same age as my son. I see you served in Vietnam. So did my dad. He was, he died because of multiple myeloma that he got from being exposed to Agent Orange. I see you love football. I went to my brother's football games growing up. He's a high school football coach now. What's your favorite team? I remind them that I'm a human being. And I say, I'm sorry you've been lied to about me. We might not agree on politics, but I can tell you that I went into government with the intentions of protecting our country and upholding our national security. And most of the time, Reed, most of the time, those guys apologize to me.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I mean, you were part of this board briefly 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
Is there continual harassment of you? Is it because they worry about you? Is it because they know that you know their playbook and they don't like having people like that out there in the ether?
I think at a higher level, that's probably true for people, maybe like people like Patel who fear what the truth holds. But I think a lot of the foot soldiers, for lack of a better word, actually do believe that I have committed treason against the United States of America. I can't even say that with a straight face because it's so absurd. But I think they really are bought into it and they believe that. And they want me to pay for that. That is something that they often say. In fact, in the first hours after it became clear that Kamala had lost the election, I got a reply on Twitter that said, "We are going to deport you."
Right.
So, yeah, I get this harassment very frequently. I'd say probably a violent threat on a weekly basis. And then the lower grade stuff happens all the time. And I think, I continue to be the villain. I was burned into the minds of these people because Fox News had my image on there so frequently.
Right.
And I've become kind of an emblem of what folks on the right are told is bad about the left, woke, liberal, fascist, fembot, I
Communist,
suppose.
socialist, Marxist.
Yeah, feminist.
Throw out every ism you can, right?
And actually I'm just a mom who's not getting enough sleep, who's trying to do something that she believes in and
like all moms, never enough sleep, right?
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. So here we are now, mid-December, roughly 5-6 weeks or so to the second Trump administration. Politically, the MAGA movement and all its attendant pieces have been more than willing to utilize misinformation, disinformation, as have the Russians and others. Do you think that at noon on January 20th, 2025, that disinformation becomes government policy?
Yeah, it certainly did in the last Trump administration. I mean, I think there are, I don't want my civil servant friends around the country to be mad at me. There are really good people still serving in government who will, as long as they can, continue to try to keep this giant cruise ship that is the United States of America on course as much as possible. And I think the Trump administration is more prepared than they were the first time to try to steer that ship away.
Right.
But they're gonna trip up a lot. And that is what I take heart in right now, that there are still those, steadfast civil servants who know government so well, who are gonna make it as hard as possible for them. So I think that will be the thing that stops going full tilt, Pravda situation. But that being said, there are only so many of those folks. And with an entity like the Department of Government Efficiency, I refuse to call it the acronyms, the word, because it's so dumb.
Yeah.
And henchmen around government in political appointments, when they stick their necks out, those civil servants, they're certainly taking a risk. And I think we will see some of them who are probably fired for cause because of that. But, what a way to go down. I mean, I hope they do it.
Right.
And the lies, of course, will be coming out not only from Trump at the very top, but from Musk and via this megaphone of Twitter that Musk now has offered via his broligarchic affiliation with Trump, too.
I mean, remember that in the first Trump administration, I don't know if disinformation or lying or, they're the same, but remember, Sean Spicer just from the first moment he stepped up to the podium, flat out lied about something as, silly as crowd size. So
yeah. And alternative facts came not long after that.
Yeah. And so let me just give you a for instance. So let's say there's the Bureau of Labor Statistics, right? And they're going to put out unemployment information. Could you see a situation where, they keep enough of the bean counters or civil servants or bureaucrats around because somebody's got to learn how to collate that data and produce it. But if it doesn't like what they say, they'll just be like, we're not putting that out, or it's the deep state lying. I mean, could you foresee something like that?
I think certainly we could see the twisting of those numbers coming from the heads and spokespeople of those departments. And I hope there are enough civil servants who are willing to take a stand and say, actually, that's not what we see. I can only see a part of the data, but, even that part says that this could not possibly be true.
Right.
And there will be people's good sense, too. And this is where I come back to information literacy, which I had a moment of despair on November 6th where I was like, information literacy is done for. Clearly, we're the stupidest people alive. But then my husband actually reminded me 70 plus million people still voted for Kamala Harris. So there are still people who want to learn, who can put their finger up to the wind and say, hang on a second, that doesn't seem right to me. And I do have faith that we can inch those numbers up and bring more people back to reality. And even in the Soviet Union, people knew when the government was lying. Not everybody was, lemming falling off the cliff.
And ironically, it's not as if because Donald Trump won that the average or individual American will really trust American institutions more.
Oh,
right?
yeah, that's true.
Ironically enough, they didn't trust it now. They don't trust it now. They're not likely to trust it, 6 weeks from now.
Yeah.
Well, listen, where can we find out more about you and the American Sunlight Project?
Yeah, well, AmericanSunlightProject.org has all of our reports, press releases, etc. We have left the bad place, aka x.com/Twitter. So you can find us on Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, and LinkedIn of all places. And my website is ninajankowicz.com. It's got all the information about my books, writing, etc. I have a newsletter on there too. So yeah, just keep up with us on social. I'm all over the place, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to all your listeners, Reed.
No, and thanks for coming. As always, gang, you can find me on Twitter, TikTok, and Blue Sky at Reed Galen, on Threads and Instagram at Reed_Galen USA. Substack, the home front. YouTube, the home front. My God, Nina, we have too many of these things. Also, Says Us, SEZ.us, the social media network for sanity. And as always, guys, join the union.us. We are in the midst of furious planning for 2025. I hope you will sign up. And if you've got a few extra bucks, smash that donate button for us. Nina, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And everybody else, we'll see you next time.